Hi there, it's Amy Kunkel from crazybeautiful.com and we're doing watercoloring today. I've started with the Strathmore colored pencil paper because it's 100 pounds. It's a good weight for a card. And I'm cutting it at 4 1/4, and I'm just cutting off this 1 inch that's left over because it started as a 12-inch pad. And I'm cutting off the end that kind of gets roughed up and just having a notepad like that. Go ahead and score it at 5 1/2. And while I have it here on the scoreboard, I'm just going to make sure it's nice and squared off. And you can do that just by pushing it up in the corner and making sure all the edges align before you score it. So what I'm working on today, I have sketched out here on my sample. So I'm going to go ahead. You can either grab a triangle like this to draw a straight line, or sometimes I like to kind of cheat and grab my paper trimmer just because it's a perfectly perpendicular line. So I'm just drawing a line at 2 3/4, which is half in the one direction, and then you rotate it and draw another center line at 2 1/8. So this just gives you kind of a good way to lay out the circles on your card. I'm using the largest of my circle framelits from Stampin' Up, but you could use almost anything to draw a circle. I did it like this because I'm a little bit type A and I wanted to have that circle and the other circles exactly the same. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but what I've done is I've started sketching each of these in, and I wanted to just have kind of a fun summary card that I'm going to freehand watercolor. But you could really do any like graphic, fruit, or shape. I thought this was just kind of fun. So um, sketch it out in pencil, and then what I did was I'm going to speed it up a little bit because it does take a little bit of time. I sketch it out and then I go over it a little bit just to get the lines exactly how I want them. And I'm just sketching this all in pencil. The reason that I ended up using the 100-pound paper instead of the watercolor paper, which is usually like 110 or 120-pound paper, is because I really just think it's smoother. You get a nicer card front. So I'm gonna show you later when I watercolor that you just don't want to add too much water to it, but you can color, you can do the pencil marks just like this really easily because the paper is smooth. So now that I've got all of this sketched in, I'm going to grab my Micron. It's a 0.3 thickness pen, and I'm going to trace over the lines. I'm going to go back to my framelit and trace the lines that are the outside of the blood orange. And actually, I didn't even really, I knew I kind of wanted to make it like a reddish orange color, but um, I've never actually had a blood orange. I think that's what they're called. But anyway, so I am tracing over it with the pen, and as you can see, it's easier to go over the lines. And instead of meeting at the corner, I'm trying to meet on one of the edges. So I try to turn the corner in one, kind of like one curve. So you'll see after I trace this, and I'm going to use the smaller circle, the next size smaller, to do the inside. So see how I've kind of turned the little corner on each of those when I add that line in, and then I continue it on. So you can see from the video, but I'm just kind of explaining maybe that it's easier to draw that edge and not from a corner. So once you get it all set, make sure it's nice and dry, and then go ahead and erase all of your pencil marks. I'm gonna grab my watercolors here. These are the Artist Lofts. I just picked them up from Michael's, I think. I'll put the description and the links below. And I'm just using kind of a flat brush. I thought it would be easier to try to get these nice crisp lines that I wanted. And I'm keeping it quite thick, so not adding too much water. Now this watercolor set is not super expensive. I think it was maybe $20, and that was a great deal because the watercolors themselves have quite a bit of life in them. So I'm just gonna keep going over all of these with the dark red. And it's easier, you can see, to turn the paper instead of trying to make your brush go in like an uncomfortable direction. So that's one of the things that I learned from doing this card. And you also want to make sure that you're not going over the top of wet paint because you can smear it with your other hand or with the hand that you're painting with. So you want to make sure that you stay away from it, let it dry. It does dry pretty quickly though because it's watercolor. So I hope I'm doing okay with the whole voiceover thing. I'm trying to do the voiceover so that I can speed up most of this because it does take a little bit of time when you're hand painting everything. So I'm gonna switch to a different color now. Just make sure I have my brush clean. I'm going to just that peachy color, and I'm gonna do my rind a little bit. So it did pick up a little bit of the black. You can keep your paper towel handy so that you can clean up any of the drips or runs that you want to try to contain. Just while it's still wet, dab it off with your paper towel. So I'm just adding a little bit of a darker color, kind of highlighting that again with the orange. And then I'm going to go ahead and I picked my color for the middle. I wanted something that would contrast quite a bit. And so I went with this dark green. And my light orange is pretty dry by this point, so it's not going to bleed together at all. So that's one thing you want to make sure of. I took a little bit too much paint off up in the corner, so I'm going to add a little bit of that back. And then, but again, just as a reminder, since this is not watercolor paper, you don't want too much water on the painting. So I'm going in, and now that it's dry, I'm hitting it with a little bit more of that red just to give it a little depth. I cleaned out my water, and I'm getting a nice thick white, and I'm gonna add some highlights here. And you can wipe it off a little bit on a paper towel, which I'm doing also just to make sure I'm not picking up too much of the color. So I'm adding a little bit of white throughout the middle of this green also to just have it look like it's got a little bit of motion. So I decided to just write a happy summertime hello. I was just feeling kind of summery, and I thought that would be cute, but you could always just leave it blank and sign it because it is a work of art. So I went ahead and in the end, I thought it looked a little messy on the inside. So what I did is I just ended up cutting off the front and adding it to a white card base. So now you have a beautiful handmade card, which can also double as artwork because it is really pretty. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure if you're a podcast listener, I've got a creative podcast. You can find it in your podcasting app, and I will also put the link in the description below. Have a beautiful day. Bye.